Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. It is 6:05, so we're gonna begin. So once again, good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Shakwana Baba, and I'll be your moderator for this session. So just before we begin, I would just like to go over a little bit of our housekeeping notes. If you do have any questions, please post it in the Q&A section or in the chat if you please. I will also be sharing the survey 30 minutes into our session and an hour into our session. Please take a moment to complete it when it do appears. And with that, it's my pleasure to hand things over to Mr. Mackey, who will be presenting on the building and maintenance of protected structures. Over to you, Mr. Mackey. Thank you.
Thank you, Shakwana. Good evening, ladies, and it's a pleasure to have you in this space again this evening. Just give me a moment. Let me share my screen, please. There we go. Beautiful. Okay, good evening once again, and welcome to this evening's presentation on building and maintaining protected structures. We spoke a lot on Tuesday interchangeably about protected structures and greenhouses. And we tend to want to use the term protected structures because not all of the structures that we use here in the region are considered greenhouses. We use a lot of shade houses as well. In this picture, you would realize that this is a shade house. And this shade house, if you realize to the right, there's a Helen's Daughters logo. This shade house was donated to the Elizabeth Pemberton Primary School a couple of years ago by Helen's Daughters. So kudos to Helen's Daughters for donating this shade house to the Elizabeth Pemberton Primary School here in Nevis. And this shade house is about 20 by 30. That's the measurement, 20 feet by 30 feet. And it is used by
Mr. Mackey, sorry to interject.
No problem.
Hi, sorry about that, but we're not seeing the display or the slide, sorry, of what you're presenting. We can see you, but we are not screen. Yes, please.
Okay, no problem. Let's try to go back out and come back in again. Yeah. How is that? Shakwana?
I'm still not seeing, just seeing you at the moment. Do you want me?
I'm not even seeing myself. Let me try again.
Okay. Yes, please. I'm confirming that I can see your screen.
Oh, beautiful.
Thank you.
And I don't think you want to see me either, so let me minimize that if I can. Everybody's seeing my screen at the moment?
There are a few persons in the chat confirming, I am confirming, and they are reacting to say yes. So we can.
Beautiful, beautiful. So we can start. Sorry about the technical glitches. I was saying that this shade house in the back was donated by Helen's Daughters to the Elizabeth Pemberton Primary School here in Nevis. And that was about 2 years ago. And we were talking initially about greenhouses and protected structures. But just for clarity, most of the structures that we use in the region are mainly shade houses. And so we would use the term interchangeably. And if sometimes you'd hear me refer to protected structures, just to remind us that we're not all talking greenhouses here. So this structure here is 20 by 30, 20 feet wide by 30 feet long. And the frame is of steel tubing, and the entire structure is covered with netting or shade cloth. This is a 50% shade. So basically it filters out a lot of the direct sunlight, and it works very well. Later on, I would show you, because I went a couple of days ago when I was preparing and took some pictures of the facility so we could see what the irrigation system look like and how inside is laid out. You could then we could then expand from there once we get to that slide and explain exactly what's happening. All right, so just want to welcome all and say kudos to Helen's Daughters, doing great things throughout the Caribbean. In St. Kitts and Nevis, and by extension throughout the region, the use of these protected structures / greenhouses has been gaining some popularity, especially as a tool to combat the effects of climate change and to give farmers an option to farm all year round. I know somebody alluded to the climate change seminar that you had a few weeks ago, and we would deduce from that the climate change, we definitely have to use some mitigating measures to combat the climate change, and the protected structures and or / greenhouses is one such mitigating tool that we can use. On Tuesday, we looked at the introduction of greenhouses, where we examined the greenhouse, the various types, and we look at the different types by structures, by the design, the roof type, the covering, and the materials used. We explore the advantages and the disadvantages of farming inside the greenhouse as opposed to open field, as well as the crops that perform best or better and would give a higher yield and thus a better return on the investment. We touched briefly on the cost, and we realized that for the most part, it's an expensive venture. So you definitely want to use the crops that would yield the best returns. But in today's session, we will discuss the construction and maintenance. At least that's the topic at hand. And I'll try my best to give an overview of what is involved when it comes to construction, maintenance of these protected structures in our region. We would realize that, and I don't expect anyone here to be able to go out next week and build a greenhouse or a shade house from start to finish, but at least you would have the concept and you would have the idea, and you could build on that and expand your knowledge as you see fit. At the end of this session, I would hope that we would have covered what is involved in starting, look at, some of the things that we need to take into consideration. The planning of the greenhouse, where you're going to put it on the and the piece of land, how much land you have, so that you could size it properly. The different stages of construction of these protected structures. The structures themselves, well, the physical structure, meaning whether it's steel, aluminum, lumber, bamboo, the different covering materials. We need to touch on the ventilation, temperature control, environmental control, whether it's naturally vented or ventilated, whether we're going to use some kind of mechanical ventilation such as fans. Critical component here is water and irrigation systems, because you want everything to be done automatically. Seed selection, I remember touching on this on Tuesday, and we could discuss and talk a little bit more about seed selection, because you really don't want to have seeds that are used for outdoor farming, using them in the protected structure, because they won't give you maximum output. And so it's almost like you're defeating the purpose. Of course, we would talk a little bit about the challenges and some solutions for those challenges for the protected structures, and the actual management of these structures as well. So these are the broad objectives. And of course, we will spend some time and flesh them out as we go along this evening. The startup capital, we would have to look at land, whether or not the land is available. Some of us are fortunate enough to have land handed down from generations or have access to family land. Some of us are fortunate enough as well to be able to lease some land from private owners or from the agricultural department or sustainable division, depending on what area you're in. But land acquisition, whether by rent, by lease, or family land, is one of the most critical components. This land, you would have to look at the size and then figure out, according to the land, what you can put on that land. Now, I want to say to you that the land should be located where there's access to what we call the amenities. Some infrastructure such as electricity, water, internet these days, because security systems would definitely need some kind of internet. Whether or not, and it's highly recommended that you fence this property just for protection, because it really doesn't make sense for you to spend 50,000, 100,000, 150,000, and you could keep going and don't have it secured. So the land should be located in an area where it's close to proper roads, close enough proximity to markets, so that you could drivable in terms of, getting your bus, your truck, your vehicle to the farm, such that you are able to take your produce at the end of the day to the market while they're still fresh and safely, because the end game is to maximize your profits. So once we've established the land size and all the other things up front, as in terms of fencing and security, then we have to look at what size we're able to afford and what size the land would allow us to put on that property as well. Size in terms of the protected structure. Now, it's important to note that most of these structures are quote unquote modular. So for example, if you build something, say 30 by 40, and then in a year's time you want to expand, you could always add on another 20 feet to make it 30 by 60, and so on, until we get up to maybe about 100, which is the standard length of the greenhouse. We try to keep it to 100 to mitigate against high winds, because as we know, the bigger the surface area is, the more is the harder the winds and the rains would hit it. So we try to stay within that range, because that has been proven to be the point where things don't start, well, before the how should I put this? Before the elements would take a real toll on it. The labor now, in terms of construction and production, is something that you would have to consider. Labor two ways: labor for construction, and then labor for the actual running of the greenhouse as well. A word here is to note that the investment is huge, so you want to have a reputable labor source to deal with it, because you don't want to expend that monies and then whoever is putting it up really don't have the proper technique and knowledge, and then your investment is on limbo. You really don't want that at all. So the key here is to, just like building a house, you want to have reliable and competent people building your house. Same way you want to have reliable and competent people building your protected structure or greenhouse. The utilities I mentioned before, you should be in close proximity to internet, electricity, water, roads, just to make the access to and from the protected structure easy and seamless. Because at the end of the day, like I say, you want to get to the market in quick time. Seeds. It is very important, as we alluded to on Tuesday, that we use the right seeds in the protected structures. Seeds that are spec for outdoors are not necessarily the seeds that you would use inside the greenhouse, because they would perform well outside. They might do the same performance inside, but then if you get the correct seeds for indoors, then you could triple or quadruple the production, just because you have the right seeds for the right environment. Now, maintenance is from day one. Like anything else, if you don't maintain it, by the time you look around, it's almost like starting over again. So one of the things I normally tell people is to keep a maintenance program with and keep a schedule, whether or not you're going to clean your filters, you got to do that and make it a habit to do that on a weekly basis. Inspection of the building on a weekly basis, so that if there's a tear in the netting, a tear in the plastic, you could get to it right away. Don't put off things for tomorrow, because by the time you come back tomorrow, it might be twice the effort and monies to get it back to normal. Storage. We would have to consider storage for equipment, such as the um, pumps, your electrical panels, your seeds, your fertilizers, that sort of thing. And then storage extends to your produce as well. You would have to make some provisions for short-term storage for provisions. It really doesn't make sense to reap 150 pounds of tomatoes and you can't even store them overnight or have ready access to the market. So whether the storage is on site or off site, you should have storage both for equipment and produce as well. I was fiddling around a little bit, and if you look at this slide, you would see if you have 2 cents or $2 invested, you might get a small return. And if you get up to $100, you might get 100 times the return. So that was the thinking behind all of these dollars. And I hope you appreciate the work and the effort there. So planning the greenhouse, alluded to the location. For more reasons than one, you must locate your greenhouse so that it's easy access and so on. But more importantly, in terms of the altitude, we really recommend that you don't put the greenhouse at sea level, which is 0. You want to get up in the altitude, say about 500 feet above sea level. Reason for this is the higher up you go, higher altitude you go, is the cooler it becomes. You realize that on the waterfront, it's really, really hot. And 500 feet plus above sea level, you'd get more dew formation at night where, it get much cooler and the plants would thank you for that. In the OECS, because we are located close to the equator, the orientation of the greenhouse and the literature would often tell you north to south. It's not so critical for us at all because the sun is almost directly overhead all year round. As a matter of fact, east to west may be a better option to minimize the shadowing of the plants inside the greenhouse. And so in the colder climates, they would really tell you, you should try as much as possible to put the greenhouse north to south. But in our environment here, it really doesn't matter too much. So what is more critical for us is the wind factor. And so you want to put the short side of the greenhouse to where the wind is coming from. So if the wind is blowing from the east, and most times that is the case, we orient the greenhouse so that the short side goes to the east so you don't get a lot of battering from the winds on the protected structure itself. When you put the greenhouse down, you want to ensure that you get maximum light exposure. And here in the Caribbean, we really don't have too much of a problem with that because even in the shorter days, like December, January, February, we still get a minimum of 8 hours of sunlight. And, we don't get a lot of shadowing either. So the wind direction should really guide our orientation. Let me go back. Chapon, I'm losing access. I'm losing control.
Give me a minute. Let me just put you.
As
Uh,
soon as the poll popped
well,
up, I lost control.
oh my gosh. Let me just edit then.
Yeah.
Okay, let me know if you got through.
Hold on. No, but let me come out and try to go back in.
Okay. Okay. Let me. Did you got through?
Just a minute.
I'm making you co-host just in case of any other interruptions as well.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Are you able to see my screen?
Confirming that I can.
Okay. All right. So we were talking about the wind, the orientation of the greenhouse, and it's more important. Thank you, guys. It's more important to orient the protected structure to mitigate against the wind itself rather than trying to catch the sunlight, because we're close to the equator, so it really doesn't matter too much in terms of the orientation. So we should not be guided by the exposure for sunlight, but by the wind direction and protecting from uh, gale force winds. I alluded to the accessibility for roads, water, electricity, and markets, meaning where you're going to distribute and sell your products. So the size, I can't emphasize this too much. The size and the actual greenhouse itself um, really depends on the land and your startup capital. Does make sense to, or if you just want to do it as a hobbyist, then you wouldn't have the same magnitude of investment as somebody who's doing this as a livelihood for commercial purposes. So the space requirement is really dependent on the usage and the size of land that you have. The land is really the limitation, and of course, the finances as well. The actual building of the greenhouse, we normally look at it in a couple of different phases or stages, just as we would for a normal dwelling house. So let's look at the foundation itself. And this is really dependent on how much you want to put into the facility, especially if, let me reword that. If you're going just for hobbies, as a hobbyist, or you're going commercial, that would depend on the structure, the foundation structure. Because, for example, I've seen shade houses where they just drill the galvanized pipes or the aluminum pipes, and just dig a hole and put it down, maybe stabilize it with dirt and rocks and so on instead of putting concrete around. But then, you really don't expect that to stand up. Sorry, you don't expect that to stand up to anything above gale force. So if you're doing a commercial building, it's best to do a proper footing with concrete, and then really maybe run up a row of block or two just to elevate the floor from the ground itself, so that if you have heavy rainfall, it's the protected structure and the plants inside is really not compromised by runoff. The runoff would hit the foundation and go around it wherever the water take the least resistant. In terms of the floor, I've seen the floor, not concrete because it's very expensive, and the concrete floors would hold a lot of heat as well. They would absorb the heat from the sun, infrared rays, as we alluded to on Tuesday. So most floors you would see of gravel or sand. I would recommend sand or stone dust because the gravel could be hard on the feet after a while. The sand is easier to walk on, especially after it's compact and so on. And then, so it's very important that you get the area level. I know one of the questions was that if we could build the protected structure on a slope. Yes, we could, but as much as possible, even if you have to do some excavation, then you would do that. It would be a little bit more expensive. But then when it comes to the irrigation, because everything is level, then you won't have you won't have your timer going off, and then there's still water in the line running down and getting over water and all of that. So the ideal position is to get the floor as level as possible. And it's very important that we have a solid foundation, because sometimes we know we get extreme weathers, hurricanes, and so on. And even if the covering is damaged, worst case scenario, you should still have your frame ready to just recover and move on. Because if that's your livelihood and everything comes down, you're back at ground zero, really. And so it is very difficult to get up and dust off and start again, especially starting from zero. So if you could have 75% of the structure still intact, it's not so difficult. Still difficult, but it's not as difficult as ground zero. So proper foundation is a key. Spoke about the drainage, and so emphasizing again that the proper drainage must be considered. I think we'd appreciate this next slide. And this is complements A1 Farms. This is back in whenever was COVID, 2020, 2021. We were able to still continue work because we were deemed as essential people, providing food and food security. So we were able to still go ahead and expand under special provisions. But this picture here, I went back in the archives and found it. And it is very instructive because someone was asking again about the slope. And if you look to the right, you would see a retaining wall. And that just gives you an idea of what's happening. That land was sloped. And if you look at the greenhouse on the right, that is the upper level. So we had to excavate down to get it flat. And because we wanted to keep the soil intact, then we had to put that retaining wall. You may wonder why the wall is of stones, but this area is so bad that when we excavated all those stones came from the foundation. So we just packed them there. The guy in the excavator is very skilled, and he just used the excavator and put up that retaining wall. So that retaining wall comes all the way down, and that is about 110 feet in length. And it's maybe in some areas up to 5.5 feet. So you could see how much we had to excavate just to get this area leveled. So it was a lot of work, but it was worth it in the end to do it right, because the structure that you would see later on has been there for a few years, and I'm hopeful that it would serve us for a long time to come. This is another angle as well. And so you could see it's now taking shape, but the retaining wall is back there. And all of these blocks were used up on the low end just to get the levels right. So it was a real project, but we had to plan it right and get it right. On the top, those are the first 2 greenhouses that we did at A1 Farms, and those were in 2013 and 2015 respectively. The structure on the left, and this picture here would show you the foundation as well. But apart from that, it would show you the upright on the side walls. Let me go to the other slide. We might have to come back to that. So stage 2, the frame and construction. So materials, we could either use lumber, metal, aluminum, PVC, and we alluded to that on Tuesday as well. But the problem is that most of these materials are imported. So if we're in an area where we could use some local materials like bamboo or some redwood from the mountains and so on, that would help us if we're just doing, well, it would help us in terms of the building cost. So if we could use materials that we have locally, it's a big help as well. That metal frame that we looked at before, there's a lot of bolts. In my case, we didn't have to, there's nothing welded, but a lot of bolts and screws and so on to assemble the actual frame itself. And here's where, if you're not too technical, you definitely need somebody who, and especially if you're doing a big investment, you would need a certified contractor and good laborers as well. Now, let me go back because I want to show you the sidewall. And the sidewall, look at the one to the left. We're aiming at least 10 feet between the top of the block and the roof. That allows us to get proper airflow such that the plants could keep cool and so on. Okay, so the sidewall should be at least 10 feet high to allow adequate airflow. Now the roof design, the pitch is based on the location to accommodate ventilation. The roof should be made of, in our case, especially if we want the greenhouse type effect, plastic covering. 6 mil, the mil is just the unit, just as you have 6 centimeters. Centimeters is the unit in length. The mil is the thickness of the plastic. So 6 mil is the minimum thickness that we would recommend you. But at 6 mil, I must tell you, once you pull that plastic tight, 250 pounds, you're able to jump on that plastic, and you can't get it ripped, you can't get it tear or anything. It's that strong. But if you could get up to 8, it's a little bit more expensive, but it's even better. And they should be installed the correct side up. Fortunately for us, most of these plastic are marked. and it will tell you right side up, this side up, something to that effect. Once you have the proper orientation of the plastic, there's properties in the plastic that would reflect the harmful rays, which are the ultraviolet rays. So it would prevent them from entering the greenhouse. And this is one of the pros of the greenhouse. You keep out the harmful sunlight rays just by using the proper plastic on the roof. So the picture on the left, or you could even look to the double house straight ahead, you would see the plastic up there. That roof has a vent to the top just to let the hot air out. But you could look at the plastic and realize that plastic and the netting is pulled very, very tight indeed. And so you could appreciate the length of the stone wall that I alluded to in the previous picture as well. All right, so on the left, you would see how the steel frame is tied together, is braced together, the roof with the different trusses and so on, keep it very, very sturdy. So this structure here is expected to stand up to category 3-4 hurricane. Caution, we may not have the plastic after category 4, but the frame should be still intact. All right. Now, stage 3, and this is when we get into covering the actual protected structure of the greenhouse itself. It spoke about the plastic for the roof, and that would be the first part of the greenhouse that we cover. We will get up there and pin down that roof and pull that plastic and lock it into place as best we can and as tight as possible. If we're using polycarbonate sheeting, we go onto the roof and screw them down just like galvanized. But polycarbonate sheeting, very durable, but does not allow as much light in as a plastic. And it's very expensive. So for our purposes here, unless we've got some great investor behind us, as was the case in Angola when I visited a few years ago, they had the Cruising Hotel, they had big investment money. So they were able to do all kind of things, fancy things with that greenhouse. I really envied that, to be quite honest with you. So once we've done the roof, then we would get to the sides. It really doesn't matter which side we do first, because they're all, well, the building is almost symmetrical, so it really doesn't matter. So whatever is your preference, the left side, right side, the back. Sorry about that. The back, the front is a little bit tricky because that's your door and so on. So sometimes we tend to leave that until all the other sides are already locked in. Now I've seen me back up here. No, I can't see it too well on this one. But I've seen where some people bury the netting, just dig a trench and bury the netting when they don't have a block foundation going right around. And that works. That works. It's not my preferred way of doing things, but it's a little cheaper and it does work. Because once you dig a deep enough trench and you pull the netting tight, and then you put sand or dirt, mainly topsoil, because you really don't want to put too much stones on there to undermine the plastic, then that would hold it as well. But my preference is once you've done the concrete foundation, you pin it down to the concrete. So back to the netting. The netting is usually what we call a 50 mesh, and 50 really just tells you how much holes per square inch is in the mesh. I've seen them in the last year or so come up with a 22 mesh where insects still can't get in, and that's 22 holes per inch. And so it allows a little bit more airflow, but full disclosure, I haven't really gotten my hands on it to try it yet, so I really can't speak too much about it, but the write-up looks really, really good. So the netting itself, we're going to secure that with profile. So the profile is going to be screwed to the frame, and then we would use wiggle wire in that profile to lock the netting in place. And I could go right to the next slide and show you how that is done. Sorry, right here. So that's the profile screwed to the metal frame, and then we lock it in place. In case of a situation where you have to take the cover off or the netting off, then you would just pry out one end of the wiggle wire and it pulls right out, almost like a spring. But once it's inside there and locked, you could yank on that, you just can't get it out like that. You would have to release one end and then let the springing effect come out. Advantages. The thing is, the polycarbonate, like I alluded to, is strong. It's lightweight and everything, and it would allow you to harvest your water. But it doesn't allow as much light in, and it tarnishes over a period of time. And it's a lot more expensive than the plastic. And in my experience, the plastic gives me about 8 to 10 years. I'm good with that. Because a roll of plastic might be somewhere between maybe about $2,500 for 30 by 100. So, it's in the big scheme of things and the longevity that you get from it. It is, to me, it's far better to use the plastic in terms of the economics and the return on your investment rather than the corrugated polycarbonate sheeting. The plastic and netting must be pulled as tight as possible. You don't want any sagging in there because sometimes we don't have, just picture for a moment a 10 by 20 tent. And sometimes the top of the tent is not pulled tight. And so what happens when rainfall? It sags and water settles in. The last thing you want is for that to happen, and then the plastic is undermined or the water seep through when you try to get out the water and comes down almost like a spouting effect on the plant itself, because those plants won't survive. They're 10 feet under, and that volume of water will just destroy them. So you want to pull that plastic and the netting to a lesser extent, but the plastic and the netting, pull them as tight as possible to prevent sagging, because you really don't want water settling on the plastic or the netting, because in some cases we use netting on the roof for the shade houses. And so if that netting is not pulled tight, then you have sagging, you have a belly inside there. And once water gets in your belly, that's it. That's how it is. So you want to pull it as tight as possible so that the water could run off into the gutters or on to the outside of the greenhouse as easy as possible. You really don't want to have too many issues there. We spoke about the netting, and I found some pictures of different netting, and this is on the top left, that's the 50 mesh. Maybe it's a little difficult, but you won't see the holes in it until you're in person right in front of it. You could see that there are holes, but you won't see exactly you won't see the holes that vividly until you have the netting or the shade cloth in front of you. You'd realize between the 50 and the bottom right, the 80, the holes by the 80 are much smaller. So for 80, you would have 80 small holes per square inch, and at 50, you would have 50 holes per square inch. So 50 would allow more airflow into the greenhouse. And then you have shade netting, and that shade netting would, just block out some more of the sun and keep the greenhouse a little cooler in the hotter months. Say June, July, August, September, because September here is still very hot. Really depends on what you're growing. A crop like cucumber, really, they say as cool as cucumber, but cucumber stands up inside the greenhouse really, really well, even in this extreme heat. Once you have adequate nutrients and a good watering system, you got good production. In the cooler months, they would still produce a little bit more, but you would have maybe about 85 to 90% of the optimum production from cucumbers in the hotter months. Lettuce, on the contrary, would go and run for cover in the heat. So what happens to lettuce is that by 10 o'clock in the morning in the summer, the lettuce leaves are folded in, so they're gone in survival mode. So instead of 42 days to the market, that might go up maybe another 10 days or so. And the quality and the size of the lettuce is nothing compared to if you had it in ideal conditions. So if you're doing lettuce, you might still need to block out some of the heat to get a better production. All right. So we spoke about the wriggle wire, and this is exactly how you would pull the netting tight and lock it into position. I must tell you that on Tuesday, the questions were coming fast and furious, and so I kind of tailor the presentation so that I could feel as much questions tonight as possible, because I think that dialogue is very, very important. The ventilation and the temperature control is of utmost importance in the greenhouse environment as well. You need to get that hot air out of the greenhouse. Little physics from third form: once the hot air hits the ground, the hot air would rise and keep the heat inside the building. But what you want to do is push that outside. So sometimes we employ some extractor fans, some reciprocating fans, just to blow the hot air, and eventually it would find itself, out of the greenhouse. You saw one of the greenhouse earlier on with vents on the top. Same principle. The hot air rises, and it finds once the cool air come in, it pushes the hot air out, because the hot air is lighter. So it goes to the top, the vent is up there, find its way outside. Now, the shade cloth. Sometimes we pull shade cloth under the plastic just to mitigate against the heat as well. Block out some of the sunlight, and therefore we won't have as much heat Now, the side with the netting, once we get those mechanical fans going, it would push some of the hot air through the holes in the netting as well. I've seen and I've tried with some success misting systems. Many of you go to Miami for holidays or for shopping, and you would see some of these patios with these misting systems, and those work very, very well in the greenhouse environment. As a matter of fact, at my home where I do all the propagation with the seedlings and so on, that 20 by 20 shade house has a misting system in there, and it really, really does wonders. Remember, we spoke about being close to amenities, utilities, whatever the correct word is. Electricity, whether if you're off the grid, definitely you'd have to have some kind of solar system. The issue with solar, and I'll be quite candid with you, it's very, very good, but it's still very expensive in terms of startup. You would recoup your investment over the years, but a lot of times, let's face it, as farmers, we don't have that excess capital to start up with. But if we could really afford it, that is the way to go. Solar systems. So that is something for consideration. But we need power, whether it's electricity or solar systems. I've seen a couple of systems where they generate the electricity by windmill, but that is kind of unreliable, especially when you're running pumps and so on. So you'd have to have no battery backup and so on. It gets really taxing on the pocket. But you would need some kind of power to run your irrigation system because the pumps really is a must. And so if the electricity supply that you have is not reliable, then you would need some kind of backup generator. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate, just something that would be able to run at least the pumps. Power, you would need power for lighting as well. In the greenhouse environment, especially if you don't cannabis, the cannabis seem like it grows a lot better when you introduce artificial lighting as well, because that industry is so prolific and is so demanding. What I found is that the 8 hours of sunlight per day is not adequate enough to boost the production. So they would employ some kind of artificial lighting, grow lights, to help with the growing of the cannabis. So the irrigation system, you definitely need electricity. The lighting, you need electricity. The fans that we alluded to for the ventilation, the security cameras, and nowadays the technology is such that we're at least putting in some monitoring systems, and these monitoring systems would not, I'm not talking security now, I'm talking monitoring in terms of moisture, humidity, temperature, and so on. And these systems are connected to the Wi-Fi and would report back to your phone with a program and different parameters. So you would definitely need electricity and power for those monitoring systems as well. Speaking of innovation and technology, I've seen these monitoring systems being used more and more. And so I'm seeing programs now where you could use your cell phone and because of the data you're getting back from your farm, you could either turn on your fans, turn off your fans, run an extra irrigation cycle, extend the irrigation cycle, and so on. So the technology is moving fast, and it's something that I really, really embrace. And maybe that's because of my initial background as well. But I'm happy to see that the technology is expanding to agriculture as well. So the younger folks, there's a niche market in the technology, in the drones, in the monitoring systems that you could get involved. I mean, the protected agriculture is already sexy, but the technology makes it so much more appealing to younger persons that I'm excited for agriculture going forward. We spoke about the fans. This is just an illustration of the fans inside the greenhouse. When you look at the straight to the back of the greenhouse, you would see the vents there as well. You would open those vents. There's a big extraction fan to the right back that pulls the hot air out. The smaller fans in the roof just blow the air, hot air back, and the big fan behind it just sucks the air out. So that works pretty good. And so what we're trying to do is keep the greenhouse as cool as possible, because just like humans, plants need to feel comfortable as well. And we spoke Tuesday about optimizing the atmosphere or the growing conditions for the plants. And just putting on the protected structure alone won't do it. So we have to add other things inside of the protected structure that would enhance the operation and bring the environment as optimum as possible to ideal, so that the plants could thrive. Example, if you're growing lettuce, from seed to maturity is usually about 42 days in the greenhouse environment. If the temperature is too high inside there, then all of that goes through the window. All right? So you try to keep the temperature, the humidity, the irrigation to optimum, so that that plant would react and smile back at you, whether it's morning, noon, or late afternoon. And so within 6 weeks, you got money coming. If the temperature is not right, then we have a problem. All right? So we try to keep the plant as cool as possible. Just think of you being in your air-conditioned office at times. The plant want to feel good as well. Shaquan, I would have to come back out and go back in again, because
My apologies.
no problem, no problem. Look like you locked me out totally now. Okay. Uh, let's see.
You're getting through because we can see your screen.
I would have to log back in.
Okay.
Okay, I'm back.
Thank you.
Do apologize, guys. Technology has its way of just showing us some curveball every now and again. So environmental controls, we could talk about cooling systems, and some of them get very elaborate, evaporative coolers, but bear in mind, the more elaborate you get, the more cost is attached to it. Exhaust fans, like we just alluded to. Just trying to keep the greenhouse at an optimal temperature and optimal space for the plant to do what it has to do and to thrive and bring you returns as soon as possible. Because let's face it, at the end of the day, it's a business we're running. And the quicker we could get those plants to market is the quicker that we could recoup our investment. We talked about monitoring systems, moisture meters, thermostats, just to record temperatures so you know exactly what you're dealing with, whether you need to lower your temperature, whether you need to, hardly would need to raise it in our environment because we're always warm, even in December. Once we get that sun coming through the plastic, it would warm it up. We would have the different gauges, the timers for the irrigation, all of those things now could be controlled from a cell phone. And that is where the technology is going. And I'm really, really excited for that. So if I get up on a Sunday morning and I still haven't done but it's my bad, still haven't done the installing of all of my equipment. But the technology is there that we could turn on the pump, turn it off from the cell phone, turn on the fans, turn on the timers, extend, give it another cycle, that kind of thing. So really exciting times ahead. Just so that you see exactly what the timers look like, what the moisture meter look like, and so on. I'm wondering here, because I've got some gadgets. I could get back to that a little bit later. Let's talk about water and irrigation. Usually what happens is that the water is mixed with the fertilizer. So we got what we call a nutrient solution, whether it's in hydroponics or drip irrigation. At A1 Farms, we're still using drip because we're planting in soil. Right? And remember, hydroponics is planting in a soil-less medium. No soil at all is involved when it comes to hydroponics. That's as simple as I could put it. But it's a little bit more challenging, hydroponics is, especially for us when we're just starting in the protected structure. Because if there's one element in the nutrient film, in the nutrient solution that is off or missing, then the plant suffers. The plant in the greenhouse environment is equivalent to a baby. It really relies on you for everything. And so if you doesn't give it milk, it's a real problem. If you doesn't give it water, it's a real problem. And so that is the case when it comes to hydroponics. You have to give that plant everything. When you're planting in soil, the soil have its own nutrients in there. So you don't have to give as much nutrients in terms of the nutrient solution in the water or the nutrients in the water. So it cuts back on the fertilizer. And if there's one or two microelements missing, whether it's zinc or calcium or anything like that, then the soil with its own nutrients would compensate for that. So although the hydroponics is a lot sexier and cleaner, the soil is more forgiving, all right? And the drip system that you're seeing here, the one in the greenhouse is a little different. Let me see if I could pull back my view such that we could okay. You guys are seeing me now, right? Shakwana.
I'm confirming that I see you.
Okay,
And I
yeah.
can see your
Thank you.
You're
All right.
welcome.
I just wanted to take a moment because this, I'm not quite sure how good you could see this. I brought some teaching aids. This is the wriggle wire I was talking about earlier. Good. Let me, but we were talking about irrigation, so let me see if I could. Right. So in terms of irrigation, this is the filter. This is one of the filters that we use. So there's a 50 micron mesh right here. And this is what you would have to clean on a weekly basis. It's reusable and it could last for a long time with proper care. All right. So every week, whether you're going to set it up on the first day of the week or the last day of the week, you would pull this filter apart. This stays in line and the top comes off. So you just have to shut the water off, open the filter, take the actual screen out, take a toothbrush, clean it, put it back together, screw it back together, and you're good for another week. Okay? But the base of it, this stays in line all the time. This is what the timer looks like. Okay? And you could program this timer for 4 different cycles per day. Different duration. For example, I could have this timer come on at 8 o'clock in the morning for 5 minutes, at 10 o'clock in the morning for 6 minutes, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon for 10 minutes. The timer could go up to an hour for each cycle. Well, this particular one. And so it could come on at 8 o'clock until 9 o'clock. But in the greenhouse environment, because the water or the nutrients go directly to the plant, we really don't have to water for extended periods. So what happens, this is what we call an emitter. This end here, this is the emitter. And this black tube is microtubing and it goes to the drip peg. Now, this drip peg goes, say this is the pot, goes directly to the, I have a pot here. Let me yeah, I do. So the drip peg goes directly into the pot where the plant is, whether it be a lettuce, a kale, tomato, pepper, it really doesn't matter. It goes right to the plant root so that there is no water that is wasted. And so if you put the timer on and the timer is on for 3 minutes, the emitter is what allows the flow. So sometimes you would have emitters that might bring a flow of, say, half a gallon per hour. So for 3 minutes, it would get that nutrient at a rate of a half a gallon per hour. If you let it run for a whole hour, that plant would get a half a gallon of water. But if you only put it on for 5 minutes, it will get a fraction of that half a gallon. And then if you have a plant now that demands a higher flow, you could either, or more nutrients, you could either do 2 ways. You could change the emitter so you could get 1 gallon per hour, or you increase the time from 5 minutes to 10 minutes, or not the time, but the duration of the dripping from 5 minutes to 10 minutes, and you get the same result. So I'm just putting the 2 different scenarios out there. All right, so let me go back to the slide if I may. Yeah. So I just paused that to show you the difference between the outdoor drip irrigation and the indoor drip irrigation. So there's subtle differences. They accomplish the same thing, but the one that we use in the greenhouse is more precise and uses a lot less water than if we were farming outdoors. The proper irrigation system should be installed with the filters like I just showed you, and shut-off valves as well. Within that system, you have your pump, the meters, your timers, and your main line and your sub-main line and so on. It's a lot of different parts that make up the irrigation system. And of course, you would definitely have to have your water source, whether it's a 1,000-gallon tank or a concrete cistern or something to hold the water. One of the things we do is water harvesting, because you've got the plastic on the roof. The roof is 30 by 100. That's a lot of roof. When rainfall, a lot of water comes off of there, and in some serious volumes as well. Right? So you would send that water, come off in the gutters. You have some 4-inch pipes. You would send that into some holding tanks or some catching tanks, and then send them into holding tanks, because you really don't want to be used in the same tank. For example, if you put nutrients in that tank and then the rain come, what happens is that nutrient get diluted, and eventually all you have left is rainwater. I mean, rainwater is good. And as a matter of fact, it's far superior to anything that you're going to get from the local water department. And while I'm on that, I would tell you, sometimes we see the rain fall and the plant go green, or the grass start to grow real green in a matter of a day or two. What happens here, let me digress a little bit, is that the rain is coming down with the nitrogen from the atmosphere. And so remember, in your fertilizer, nitrogen is one of the key macro elements: NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So if you have that nitrogen in the atmosphere readily available, that is what mixes with the water when it rains to get your plants really, really green. You could accomplish the same thing by adding a fertilizer such as urea to plants, and you get the same greening effect. Urea is rich in nitrogen. So just thought I would take a little diversion and throw that out there, because sometimes we wonder why rain get everything green. So when we looked at the greenhouse structures, we realized that there were gutters attached to the greenhouse. And so the gutters would collect the rain and send it into the catchment, and then it's storage system like I just alluded to. This is here, I tried to get a picture that would mimic that. I hope you can see on the left, that's the guttering system right here. You might realize that the downspout here is open because this is the front and the water runs to the back. This is the back here. So what happens is that we attach a 4-inch pipe, PVC pipe to that, and then into the 1,000-gallon tanks. And then we use the other 2 tanks as holding tanks. All right, so that is just a simplified way of harvesting the water, very easy way of harvesting the water. Now, you could have these tanks feed another holding tank. if you have the space and the volume of water. I mean, once you have a big house like that, you would definitely get the volume of water. Build a cistern and gravity feed everything down. And so it works wonders that rainwater, purest you could get already mixed with the nitrogen, hey, you're good to go. This slide that we're looking at, look on the right-hand side. And I just showed you the drip pegs, the emitters on the drip line there, and they go right into the pots. School had just opened, so they really didn't start planting anything yet. They were just cleaning up the pots to start the second, well, to start producing for that for this particular term. So you see the PVC line, you could see the green valve, the green valve, that's a shut-off valve. And so this is the shade house at Elizabeth Pemberton Primary School. This is the one that Helen's daughters donated to them. You could see the ground cover. They've got it relatively clean and so on. Like I said, they were just cleaning up when I went there 2 weeks ago to look at it. So, and this is a protected structure. It's not a greenhouse, it's a shade house because there's shade cloth all around and on the top itself. Okay. So the drip irrigation system, I don't think there's too much more to say on that. We talked about the microtubing, the emitters, the drip line with the shutoff, the pump, the water filter and the screen, water source or nutrient tank. And then we talked just a while ago about the water harvesting. What I try to do, like I said, is leave as much time to get some questions in. I'm just monitoring. We got half an hour to go, but I can't close until we talk about seeds because that question came up and the seeds are very, very important. The selection of seeds, very, very important. Always, always, always. Once you've done the investment, this is not like you're outside and you went to the supermarket and you get a tomato and the tomato is firm, so you're going to throw the seeds there and if you come, you come. Different kettle of fish now. We've invested. We spend 50,000, 100,000. We need to recoup some monies and we need to get a proper value and a proper return on our investment. So seeds, that's where we start now. And the selection of seeds is very, very important. One of the things we got to realize is that there are seeds that are just regular seeds, like that's a regular, the small seed, the one closer to your left hand, is both of them are lettuce seeds. But one is what we call a pelleted seed, look like a very, very tiny egg. And the other one is just the seed in its raw state. The pelleted seed and the raw regular seed, they would germinate, they would produce the same way. The advantage of the pelleted seed is that it's a lot easier to manage. When you're sowing seeds, and for us, when we sow lettuce seeds, we basically would sow 1,000 seeds twice a week. And if we have to work with these regular seeds, it's very, very tedious. But with the pelleted seeds, we've devised a way to just have them slide off your finger and drop into the holes in the tray seamlessly. So I just wanted to point that out to you. The pelleted seeds are a little bit more expensive, but time is money. And it really doesn't frustrate you dropping more than one seeds too often in the hole so that you'd have to take back out one and so on. So that's the main difference between the pelleted seed and the regular seed. Now, in terms of the seed itself, when you go to buy seeds for the greenhouse or the protected structure, please ask for greenhouse seeds. And let me stress this. There's a indeterminate seed, and this one have a very, very high cash value. Let's look at tomatoes. There's an indeterminate version of tomatoes that you use in the protected structure. And this tomato seed in our environment would yield fruit for up to 6 to 8 months, depending on the climatic conditions and so on, as opposed to the determinate tomato seed, which would only fruit for about 2 to 3 weeks, 4 at the most. So you could see the difference, all right? So you really don't want to have $100,000 greenhouse and put a determinate seed inside there that would only fruit for 3 to 4 weeks. It really doesn't make any economic sense at all. Let's talk about the growing media now. Growing media, like I said, we at A1 Farms, we're still in soil and that works for us. But you could have, if you want to do hydroponics, you could still have the pots and sow and plant in maybe cocoa peat or coconut fiber or perlite or anything like that. But remember, the soil is forgiving. Hydroponics is not. So you would have to be on top of your game with your nutrients. Everything would have to be spot on. Even the pH of the fertilizer would have to be spot on. So for example, if you're doing tomatoes are a little acidic. So you'd be on the acidic side of the scale. So your nutrients would come in at maybe about 5.8 or something like that. With the soil, it really doesn't matter. The soil will do the correction. Okay? And another media is grow bags. That's hydroponics as well. You would stick just the drip line right into the grow bag by the root zone, and you go from there. Hydroponics, channel system, like I say, pipes, you would have your nutrients run along the bottom of the pipe and the roots are there. It's a very, almost like a trickling effect. The roots would absorb what they need because the water is there constantly. The other hydroponic system is like a trough system where you submerge a whole, almost like a 2x4 foam into the trough, and then the roots just suck the water up. Let's talk about spacing a little bit, plant spacing. It's very important that you don't put the plants too close. If you're planting lettuce would work well maybe about a foot apart, because you want to give at least 6 inches to the right and 6 inches to the left. So one go to the right, one go to the left, you've got a foot apart. Now, for example, same greenhouse, if you're planting tomatoes or cucumbers, you want a little bit more space because you want that airflow as well. And remember, it's a much bigger plant. And while I'm on that, the tomato plant is like a vine. Huh? And so what would happen is that you would grow the tomatoes on a chalice system such that once the tomato is growing, every side shoot that it puts out, then you pick that off. So you got one main stem going up. You will get much bigger, firmer fruits because the plant now really doesn't have all those side shoots to deal with. It's just like you have, funny example, but you have a pig and she get 15 piglets as opposed to a pig with 6 piglets. That pig with the 15 would struggle to support those 15 pigs. The one with the 5, hey, it's a piece of cake. And there's really no difference. Sorry about the example, but there's really no difference here. You want to support one main root, one main stalk, sorry, and send the nutrients to the fruit itself. Right? So that is a nutshell how the spacing goes. You don't want it too cramped. You want to have some space there for, and then you remember too that you would have to go through and attend to those plants. So if the cucumber is too close, how would you get through? If the tomato is too close, it poses a problem. You can't function, the plant can't function, and then the fruit is compromised. So some people think more is better, but there's a limit as to how much you could cram in that space. This is from A1 Farms Nursery. I just wanted to show you seedlings at different points. We use what we call a 50 cell tray for most of our seedlings because what we find is that when you use the 72 and the 100 tray, the roots don't get to develop as much. They're compromised. But when you use a bigger cell, the root get more time to expand, and by the time you transplant, you really don't see any kind of slowdown for the plant to kind of gather itself. It just takes off. It just continue growing. One of the things that I should point out is that in this environment, we label everything. So if you walk into this shade house now and pull out the marker, you would see when it was sown, what type it is, and so on. Because usually what happens is that in the case of lettuce is 42 days from seed. We usually have it here for 21 days and then in the production house for another 21 days. Give and take 1 or 2 days sometimes, depending on the planting schedule, but that is the way it works. Cucumber now, on the other hand, by 10 days, 7 to 10 days, cucumber is ready to be transplanted. So you have to keep a tab on that. And although we, would keep records of it elsewhere, it's easier. It's very easy when you go and you just look at the label, you say, okay, tomorrow we got to get you out in the production house, and there you go. Let's touch a bit on the challenges. I think we touched on that on Tuesday, but the cost of construction and installation of the greenhouse can be very prohibitive. It's still very costly. One of the problems is that we don't have and we don't manufacture anything in these parts to help us with the cost reduction. Technical expertise still lacking. And I could safely say that there's nobody in the agriculture department in the region dedicated to greenhouse technology. A few of them might know a thing or two, but they're not very versatile. That is my experience. I stand corrected. High cost of inputs, the seeds are specialized, and we really don't have anybody in the region breeding proper seeds for greenhouses. Diseases and infections, rodents, whiteflies, mealybugs, aphids. What I do for rodents is that I keep a party for them every 6 weeks or so. I just go by local hardware, and they've got a thing called One Bite, and I just put it around. And that keeps them at bay, because if you don't and they take over, what would happen is that they would even bite holes in your netting and get inside. And then that opens up the door for whiteflies, mealybugs, aphids, you name it. So one little party for them every 6 weeks, and you don't have to worry about it. Climatic control, we looked at that. Sometimes when you get into the droughts and the hurricanes, not much you could do. Hands are tied, really. Challenges again, sometimes the labor force throughout these islands, people still have a stigma when it comes to agriculture. They don't see agriculture as sexy, they don't see it as rewarding, and that is a real myth. If you do agriculture right, you can make 10 times as much money as some people who sit behind an office and look pretty. All right. Water shortages. Guys, I can't stress this enough. Before you invest, make sure that you have access to water, because it doesn't make sense to do a greenhouse because you're not planting outdoor. The plant is relying on you for everything. And if you have a lot of water shortages and you don't have access to water, forget it. Perennial larceny. Unfortunately, guys think that sometimes they think that you have a greenhouse and you're growing marijuana, so they come looking for dope. And the others know exactly what you're doing, and they come and they pick your peppers and they create a market, which is really, really distasteful. Solutions and best practices, education, good agricultural practices. Make a note, guys. There is a company called Bayer, Bayer. They've got a very, very good course on good agricultural practices. I would admonish everybody to check that out. They're very reputable, and you could do it on your own time. Practice integrated pest management. Very important. Keep your surroundings clean. Very, very clean. That alone in itself would eliminate a lot of headaches. Adequate maintenance. Inspect. Change when you have to change. Don't let it get out of hand too late. Keep records. Record keeping is very, very important. You know how much yield you get. You know how much seeds you sow, when you sow, the return on your investment, because we got to treat this thing as a business. Water harvesting and management is a must. But I showed you the difference between the rainwater. You not only cut back on costs because the rainwater is free, but the plants would smile back at you for it. Security of the property, that's very important. When you can, you put cameras, but fencing, basic fencing must be in place to keep away stray animals, dogs, cattle, sheep, goat, whatever it is. And just to let people know, hey, business is going on here and I'm serious, keep out. Cleanliness is a must. I said repair and replace and so on as soon as you see. Don't let it get too far. Whatever you have to remove in terms of weeds and grass around the area, keep them at bay, because they would harbor worms, whiteflies, and all of that. You don't want any high grass or shrubs in your immediate proximity. I always get this, Mackie, when there's a hurricane coming, what do you do? So these are some of the things that we do as much as we have control over. We lower all the plants that are on trellis, get them to the ground, remove the wiggle wire from the profile, allowing the air or the high winds to pass right through. Move potted plants if you can. Disconnect and store solar panels and pumps in a safe place. Shut off all mains electrical supply. Everything, you gotta shut it down. Shut off all the water supply. Remove all small objects from the area. And I know that we are godly people, so we pray and pray and pray and pray and ask God to divert Mr. Lenny or Mr. Harris or Stacy or Lucy or whoever else it is. Benefits of the greenhouse farming. This is a picture directly from A1 Farms. We were trying some English cucumber and we found some real good success. And so that is just a picture right there. Higher yields and quality. People would realize that they're very uniform. The greenness is right through. And that is the beauty about trellising. You don't have one side whitey and the other side green and unappealing and some bruise and so on. You could plant all year round because you could control some of the elements inside, and you could plant cash crops that would give you a good return on your investment. You're able to mitigate against pests and diseases. And this is a good one. You increase your profits. It's a lot less labor intensive. So some of that money that you would spend out on labor, you could put in your back pocket. And it's a much cleaner environment. You could leave there and take your produce straight to the marketplace. Don't have to change or anything like that. You're clean. You're good to go. All right, we're getting to the end. Wanted to leave some time for questions. We have realized that the greenhouse farming provides the opportunity to farm all year round, which is really, really good. And so, as opposed to traditional farming, where sometimes once July hit, we just have to put down our forks and hose and take a holiday somewhere. Proper planning, construction, and maintenance of the greenhouse, very paramount and important to the success of the protected structure. Stress, and can't stress enough, water harvesting, very cheap, efficient irrigation, and specialized plant care are critical components that influence the quality and quantity of your yield. Farmers must continuously stay informed about new technologies, trends, developments relating to greenhouse farming, and maximize profits, because at the end of the day, the profits is what we're after. We could talk as much as about food security, about all this kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, we got to be able to pay the bills and send our children to school. Guys, thanks very much for your attention. I know it's a little bit longer than I anticipated, but I was trying to touch base on all the different areas that, would get you thinking, get you your curiosity level up a little bit. But now let's have a conversation. Shakwana?
Thank you so much, Mr. Mackey. Just to note, I'll be launching the poll now. So if you find some time, please fill that poll out. The first question is, do you use fertigation unit on your drip system?
That's a good one. We have in the past, but we use a very simple system. We have a mixing tank where we mix the fertilizer in the tank, and then that is fed through the pump back through the filters and into the greenhouse itself. So over the years, we've measured the optimum amount of fertilizer that we need to use. So for example, we would use like 12 pounds of fertilizer to 4,000 gallons. And that works for us. So if we're using a 1,000-gallon tank, then we just put in the ratio that fits that 1,000 gallon. And so we really don't use fertigators in the greenhouse, but we have used it in the past. We find this way a little bit more efficient, because once we mix the fertilizer in the tank, everything else is automatic after that. Same with the fertigator, but yeah, we fertilize on a regular basis because we don't have to use the volume of fertilizer because the soil corrects and help us with the fertilization actually.
Thank you very much. Why do we need the internet near the greenhouse?
The internet near the greenhouse is so that you could get the information sent back to you on your cell phone. So if you're using monitoring systems, if you're using all these different monitoring systems like moisture meters, temperature gauges, and so on, then you could have that fed right back to your cell phone, so you know on a real-time basis what's happening in the greenhouse itself. This is not mandatory, but I'm just saying where the technology is going. So by using your cell phone, you're now able to turn on your irrigation system or turn it off, as the case may be, according to the parameters you're getting from your monitoring systems in the greenhouse itself. That is just the way the technology is trending.
Thank you. Should the soil in the greenhouse be covered with plastic, in brackets, landscape plastic? Should farmers use the soil found on site? Or should plastic bags with peat moss be used? And what material should be used for planting?
Okay, very, very good question. What we do at A1 Farms is that we put down, first of all, in the greenhouse, what we call a ground cover. Some people refer to it as a weed mat. Remember the picture back at Elizabeth Pemberton Primary School, you see that black matting on the floor? That is what we put down. And then we put the pots on top of that. So the plastic the ground cover would do the same thing as the plastic. Right? It's just that the ground cover is a lot more durable and it suppresses weeds a lot better. Then in terms of the media itself, we mix our topsoil. We get our topsoil from construction sites. Because what happens here is that when a house is being built, they scrape off, when they dig the foundation, they take the topsoil, maybe the first 6-8 inches, and they put that aside. Then they screen it and store it, and then you could go and purchase it by yards. Maybe a truck would carry 6 yards, 10 yards, 18, up to 18 yards. It depends on how much topsoil you need. And then what we do at A1 Farms is that we then mix that with either compost or very cured manure, whether it's chicken manure. We raise rabbits, the rabbit manure, but you could use any type of manure. And we normally do that in a ratio maybe about 6-1. So we would do maybe 6 scoops of topsoil to 1 scoop of manure, and we mix that. And then we put that in the pots. So we have a very rich soil. The topsoil is already rich, and then we have a very rich media, but we usually use soil and manure. And that would last us for maybe about a year and a half, 2 years. After that, we realized that we would have to start using more fertilizer. So we would either add a little scoop, maybe one of those hand tool scoop of fertilizer to the pot and mix it up, and then we continue. Or in extreme cases, we would change it out or take off the top and just maybe add fresh soil and so on. Peat moss, you could, depending on your soil type, because the peat moss or the Promix would help loosen up the soil as well. But we find that the topsoil is very is very good, well aerated and so on. So we really don't have to add a whole lot of peat moss to that. We just add compost or the manure.
Thank you. Next question. I've seen various types of greenhouse online. Is there a reason or advantage of having a round roof?
The round roof I've seen, and we have used I'm sure she's talking about maybe a half moon roof, right? We have used that with great success. It allows for easy installation of the plastic because you could pull the plastic right over the half moon roof. And so we find that type of roof a lot easier to work with at A1 Farm. So yes, I would lend my support to that type of roof. It works well for us.
Thank you. Would you recommend 2 doors for greenhouse to avoid insect infestation and contamination?
That's a must, really. So what happens is that you have the second door, so that if you go into the first door, and the second door is not directly behind the first one, so it's almost like a trap. So even if the insects get into the first door, then it's difficult for them to get into both at the same time. So that is something that you really should employ. Now, having said that, you should use foot bath in that same entranceway as well, just to increase the cleanliness and so on. Eliminate bacteria going through back and forth.
Thank you. What would you recommend as a better crop to grow in clay dirt?
Ooh, clay. What I would recommend is that you soften up that clay. Add some sand, add some compost, add some manure, soften up the clay. Because you, especially in the greenhouse environment, the clay holds a lot of moisture. And you really don't want moisture being present in the greenhouse like that. That's why I was saying that the last irrigation cycle should be timed such that by the time night falls, the greenhouse is dried out. Very little moisture is inside there, because we know once the environment is closed up, like the greenhouse, it attracts fungus and algae. So you really want to not use the raw clay in the greenhouse, but if it's clay you have, then you would put some additives to it. Whether it's pro mix, whether it's sand, whether it's compost, manure, something else with it to loosen it up. Worst case condition, don't use the clay and bring in some topsoil or something. But if you must use the clay, mix it with something else, because you want a well-drained soil inside the greenhouse, because you really don't want that moisture lingering in there overnight when the place gets cool to attract fungi and algae and so on.
Thank you. Next question. How can pots or plants be raised to avoid backbreaking agriculture?
Well, there are benches, especially when we're doing hydroponics. You could use those same benches and put the pots on them. Remember, though, that that's an added cost. And because it's an added cost, you have to weigh whether or not you want a little exercise to bend over. And remember, you're really in bending over for extended periods of time either. But yes, by all means, if you could afford the benches, they're only about, just like your counter high, but 36 inches from the ground. And some of these we could build ourselves, right? Just like the shelving that I would have in the propagation house. So you'd bring it up 3 feet off the ground and then have a platform. But that platform, again, you would want it to be of a wire mesh or some tubing, so that it doesn't hold the moisture. All right. But yes, the solution is build benches. But just remember, it's an added cost. If you build proper benches, then you have them there for years, and then you see the return on the investment. But that is the only way to get from that. Now, the other thing is, if you're growing crops like lettuce and kale and so, that's ideal. But if you're growing crops like tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers, then you want to plant them on the surface of the ground, because then they would chalice up 8 feet, and then it's a very tall plant, and it won't stay at ground level for too long. So you'd need all that space you could get. Just something to think about.
Thank you. What type of roof is better when constructing a greenhouse that would provide optimum ventilation? Is it a hip roof or gable roof?
Well, I've seen the hip roof and the gable roof worked, and in our environment, both of them I don't necessarily would take one over the other. As a matter of fact, all of my greenhouses now are half moon roofs, and that works. Once you have a good venting system, it really shouldn't matter too much. The half moon to me gives a little bit more space for airflow, and that is where my preference is really.
Thank you. Someone wants to, well, someone stated that they have available land to build a huge greenhouse. Water is not a problem because they can source water from the river that is close by, and rainwater is also a
Beautiful.
plus. But the question is, how do they get the necessary funds to secure a greenhouse?
Well, um, I will tell you my experience. What I did is I put a business plan together, did all the research and so on, and then I approached a financial institution. It was a hard sell back then, over 10 years ago, but the plan was so elaborate that I was able to win them over. But that is the way that I would recommend. Do the research. If you need some help, I could help you. Do the research, put a business plan together, look at your imports. For example, if you're trying to do tomatoes, get the data from the customs department and get the data from the agriculture department to see how many tomatoes is imported on a yearly basis, and show that you can tap into that market. Because, for example, when I was doing the research back in 2011, 2012, Nevis was importing over 130 pounds of 1,000 pounds of tomato annually. And my thrust was, if I could even get 15% of that, and then 15% of the green peppers, the market is wide open, because the import bill was so high. And what I found too is that, doing the research, is that people really don't like the imports, but the farmers weren't able to produce tomatoes all year round and peppers all year round. So that was an easy sell for me, in terms of when I put the business plan together and had the figures from agriculture, had the figures from customs, and had certain commitments from supermarkets and so on. In my case too, is that I have a little storefront. In my first life, I did a lot of networking and electronics and so on. So I was able to use a table there to sell to the public. Now it's more of a vegetable market than than computers. But that is just my experience, and I'm sharing that with you so that you would have an idea. Your experience or your thing might be a little different, but hearing my story, you should be able to tailor yours in such a way that it fits right there. But the research is very important. The numbers, the hard numbers, is very important. And if you could get a couple supermarkets or hotels or resellers on your side, or if you have an output, you should have no troubles at all. Because, for example, if I produce 500 pounds of tomato this week, and I produce 1,000 next week, all gone same way. Yeah. The local produce stands up and tastes so much better. And all of that is supposed to be part of your business plan. And so you'd be able to show what your cost of production is and so on, and your sales numbers, a projection of your sales numbers, and then you should be able to show that yes, I have a viable project, and I could recoup my cost of the return on my investment in 3 to 5 years or something like that. But it's very doable. I financed it, and to be quite honest with you, what happened is that after I did the first greenhouse, there was some hiccups in the economy. And so the financial institution gave a moratorium on the loan for a year. And so I was able to use that money and build a second greenhouse before I started paying back. So just to...
Thank you very much. Second question is, can you use the covering inside the pot to reduce weeds?
Probably you can, but I see no reason to, because once you have proper soil, there shouldn't be too many weeds coming up inside those pots. We really don't see that at A1 farms at all. You would have the odd plant that comes up here, the odd weed that comes up. But because of the protected environment, wind doesn't blow seeds in there too often. Where I've seen a problem is that we've intercrop, or well, I shouldn't say intercrop, but we have had the callaloo growing on the side inside the greenhouse, and those callaloo seed very, very quickly. So if you leave them there to seed, then they have very fine seeds, and then you would have to keep pulling them out of the pots. But generally speaking, I see no reason why you should have to put plastic in the pots. There's some pellets, and I can't remember for the life of me now what the name is. But when I started, I've sprinkled a few in the pots, and they somehow just suppress the weed growth. Yeah, I think it's something to do with preventing seeds from germinating or something like that. But I would have to go back and do the research. But I really don't think that you would have too many issues with weeds in that little small space called a pot, because the ground is already covered, and such as what would grow up in the pot, when you go to inspect your plants and stuff, you just keep you close to your plants, you just pull them out.
Thank you. Can kiwi grow in our climate and be produced in greenhouse structure?
I've seen strawberries, but I haven't had any experience with kiwi at all. So that is not something that I could comfortably speak to.
All right, thank you. Does the indeterminate seeds only work for greenhouses?
No, they would work out those as well. But the challenge is you would have to erect some kind of chalice system outside, at least 10 feet high, to string the plants to. And these plants would grow, tomato plants would grow up to 35 feet over the 8-month period. And so you would have to find a way to lower them down. I mean, I've grown cherry tomatoes, which is indeterminate outside, and they've done fairly well, but nothing compared to inside. But you get a better yield from the indeterminate, even if you put them outside. You'll get a better yield outside than the determinate tomatoes. So yes, they can work outside.
Thank you. Is leca used in semi-hydroponics available in St. Lucia?
No, I can't speak to that at all. I don't know the St. Lucia market like that.
Okay, no problem. How nutritious are those greenhouse seed? We heard about how much produce you can get out of them and how long, but health-wise, are all the nutrients in there?
Yeah, man. As a matter of fact, there's big arguments back and forth about greenhouse production and being more healthy than outdoors. I could tell you, the cucumbers and the tomatoes and the lettuce taste much better. The taste and the nutrition and everything is, um, I don't have specifics, and I hate to speak without having the specifics, but the general consensus, I would tell you, is that the greenhouse produce is a lot more nutritious than outdoor. I mean, we really don't have all of the elements beaten down on the tomato, on the pepper, on the lettuce, and so on. So I mean, everything is there. Everything is inside there.
Well, thank you. I know you said that the side branches are pruned in tomatoes plants. What about the bottom leaf? Should they be pruned?
Usually, what we do is that we would prune up to the first cluster. So where it fruits, we would leave one leaf under that first cluster until that first cluster is reaped. And then we would take off the cluster and then leave between that and the other cluster. So apart from the shoots, yes, we take off the leaves, but we take them off systematically. We wouldn't take off the leaf above a cluster and the cluster is still on the tomato tree because we want some protection of the fruit still. For example, if we take off the leaf above the cluster of tomatoes or the fruit itself, what happens is that the rays from the sun hit that fruit directly, and you would get some tarnishing, some discoloration, and that you really don't want that. So yes, prune the leaves off, but only up to the first cluster. So you would leave the leaf under the first cluster, you prune as far as there. When you take off that cluster, you do the same thing up to the next cluster.
Thank you very much. Melissa mentioned you spoke about someone with technical skill sets when setting up a greenhouse. Why can't we piggyback on the agriculture sector?
The problem with you could piggyback on the agriculture sector if they have the expertise, but I've traveled the region and I haven't seen, and I'm not confident that the agriculture sector in the different OECS territories have all the expertise needed. But if in your territory they do, sure, by all means, by all means. That is one area where I keep advocating that needs strengthening. But what I've seen is that they've tried, and as soon as somebody gets up to speed, they've gone on their own and they're going to do other things. So if it's changing in the different territories, I'd really appreciate knowing that.
All right, thank you. Two persons would like you to repeat the name of the education platform.
Bayer, Bayer. And
All right.
the course that I would recommend is GAP,
Awesome.
Good Agricultural Practices.
Thank you. Next question. If you were doing your produce in a greenhouse structure, shouldn't it reduce pest and disease and white flies?
Oh yeah, in the presentation we alluded to that. That is one of the advantages because it's a enclosed environment. The the Pests and diseases are down to a minimum, but like anything else, they can't be totally eliminated. I remember I spoke about the rodents. What happens is that if you get rodents coming around your farm, they would bite the netting. And once they bite the netting, they expose the greenhouse to holes. And sometimes the white flies go through them same holes. Now, the other scenario here is, and we're guilty of this, we have outdoor farming and we have the greenhouses. And from time to time, the guys would lapse and go into go outdoors and then come right back and instead of changing clothes and so on, walk right into the greenhouse. And that is an area um, of entrance for whiteflies, for other pests and so on. And so sometimes what happens is that the eggs from the outdoors get on the clothes and they come in, and before you know it, you've got some whiteflies in there. And because the environment is enclosed, once they're in, they're in. It's just like when they're out, they're out. Once they're in, and they would multiply. And so you have to be vigilant. But definitely, chances of getting infestations and so on is very, very much reduced in the protected structures, but it's not totally eliminated. There's still that possibility. If you drop your guard, then you'll pay for it.
Right, thank you. Do you have any tips on trellising or preferred mechanism for trellising?
Yeah, Charleston, what we do is that we run the cables in the roof parallel to the ground, and we space them maybe about 18 inches apart. And so when we trellis the cucumbers, we would wrap it loosely to the seedling as it grows. Then we just wind it around, and twice a week we'll go back and wind it around. Now, if you don't, especially with cucumbers, if you don't pick off the tendrils, the little things that grab on, what happens is that they might jump from one to the next. So you would have to pick those out and do the wrapping yourself. There's a special twine or cord that we use called a tomato twine. You could go, what's the company called? But you could just Google it, tomato twine. I think it's Continental Western. Continental Western is one of the companies that carry the tomato twine. It comes in a box about 1,800 and almost 1,900 feet long. And it's very reasonable price. It's like 10 US dollars or something. But that tomato twine is waxed, so it would not cut into the tomato vine or into the cucumber vine. It's it's very, very, the tensile strength is very, very good. I've used the said tomato twine on maybe about 4 different crops before I have to change it. And you know how heavy those cucumbers get once, they start to produce. So I would recommend that anytime. So just run your cables to the top. If if you look closely to this slide that I have up there, you would see the cables running right across the top. See those lines? Those are the trellises. Yeah.
Thank you. Can you give the information where we well, I guess, get the good agriculture practice in which you already mentioned, which is the BAYE?
Yeah, Bayer. Bayer. Just Google
Someone
it.
someone had posted in the chat as well for easy reference for
Okay.
you.
Beautiful.
Some commend you for your informative session, and also what are your thoughts on Miracle Grow as a fertilizer?
Miracle Grow is decent. Let me put it that way. It's decent, but it gets expensive if you're gonna use it commercially. There's a fertilizer by Peters, Peters. That's the name of the company, and it's called a 20-20-20. So the ratio is 20 nitrogen, NPK, potassium, and phosphorus, and it has all of the micronutrients as well, like zinc, copper, boron, and all of them. I think the only thing that might be missing might be calcium. I find that to be a lot cheaper and a lot more complete than Miracle Grow. It comes in a bag of, see the bags are about 20 or 25 pounds or something like that. The cost, maybe depends on the supplier, between 30 and 35 US dollars. Might be off a little bit because I usually buy them by the pallet. There's about 80 in a pallet. But check that out, 2020, the Peters brand. And I find that it doesn't, no matter how young your seedlings are, it doesn't burn your seedlings or anything like that. And just maybe 1 or 2 teaspoonful for to the 5 gallon for your seedlings, and you're good to go. But that is what I use commercially. And that is the only fertilizer apart from what I mix with the soil that I use. I used to mix my fertilizer when I just started. It was a real challenge if I'm not there because most of the guys really don't understand the chemistry. When you got to mix tank A and tank B and all the chlorides and all of the different fertilizer together, and that was a real challenge. It's cheaper, but it's more taxing in my mind. When I came across the 2020, I got good results. You could see how green the plants are, and I have moved for the past maybe 8 years or so. But Miracle Grow is okay, but I find that it's expensive for what you get.
Thank you very much. Next question: to combat water storage, especially when there is a limited rainfall, how do we treat the pipe water to be compatible?
There are some solutions that you add to the pipe water. I can't remember the name offhand, but it almost like it softens the water. But I don't even bother with that anymore. What I do is I make sure that my filters are clean, such that the sediments in the pipe water really doesn't block up the drip lines, and that is what I do. It's just too much of a volume of water to have to treat all that water. It just doesn't work out mathematically. But there are treatments. There even your local agriculture department or any plant store should sell the treatment for the water. The only time that we just use that, if we got to use the pipe water, if we have to do any kind of spraying, we would treat the water to be able to, because sometimes when the water is so hard, you lose the effectiveness of the chemicals that you want to spray with. Even neem oil and stuff like that, I find that if you don't treat the water, you don't get the same efficacy of the substance. But to treat it commercially, we just put some redundant filters in line and do it that way, because it just, in terms of the economics, it just doesn't work out at all.
Thank you. Next question: the soil from construction sites usually have a lot of grass seed. How do you manage that?
Well, you see, what happens is that we find once the topsoil comes off, because these guys who does it around here would scrape off the top, put that aside, and then they take out all of the shrubs, and then screen it and send it to you. I really don't have too many issues with what I get here. So, but like I said, there are some there are some products out there that would prevent seeds from germinating. And just like how you would have your NPK fertilizer and you throw a little bit in the pot, but because I'm not affected so much, I haven't even used that thing there in years, so I really can't remember what it is. Yeah.
Thank you. Do you recommend greenhouses for watercress planting?
Yeah, well, watercress, anything like that is does much better in a protected environment. So yes. There's some really good niche markets too. If anybody wants to, and it doesn't take up a lot of space, and it's really, really good, quick monies. If you're in an area where the hotel industry is vibrant, they import a lot of microgreens. And that is one of the things that we did successfully for years. Microgreens, you could have kale, you could have cabbage, any of those herbs you could use for microgreens. And not kidding you, in where you got special trays for them, special flats, in 7 to 10 days, you've got money coming because they just want them um, just after sprouting. And that's why they call them microgreens. By the time they import those and they get here, half the time they lose 75% of them. So that is something that you could do commercially in a small space, say 10 by 10, because every 10 days you're turning over. Every 10 days you're turning over. So that is something that I think a few of the participants could really latch onto. Research microgreens, you see what it takes, you see how quick you get some money in your pocket, especially if you're in a high tourist area where hotels thrive. You should have no problem selling that to the hotels.
Thank you. And then we're just gonna take these last two questions and that will be it. So the second to last one would be, can we mix crops, tomato and cucumbers?
I've done it. It's a little big because I feed everything on the 20-20-20 fertilizer. I really don't have a issue with mixing the crops. What I would say, frankly, though, is that I try not to mix cucumber and tomatoes because no matter how good your management program is, at the end of the life of the cucumber tree, I find that we tend to get some fungus, and you don't want that spilling over on the tomatoes. Case in point, the tomatoes would last in excess of 6 months fruiting. The cucumber would fruit productively for about 2 months, which is 8 weeks. So you don't want to jeopardize your tomatoes, because after 8 weeks, usually fungus start to step in on the cucumbers. You see what I'm getting at here? So, if you could manage it, yes, but it's not something that I would recommend. I would recommend peppers and tomatoes in the same house because they basically have the same kind of lifespan. So if a disease, and diseases usually would come in when the plant is weak, when it's at the end of its life cycle. So if something steps in on the tomato 6 months down the road, you already got back your return on your investment long time. So if it then affects the peppers, you just pull everything out and you start again. But if you have cucumbers and after 2 months you got a fungus and it jumps over to the tomatoes, then you're losing 4 months of productive life of that tomato plant. So I would caution against mixing those two, just
Thank you.
because the life cycle is totally different.
Thank you very much. And the last question would be, someone tried to germinate chive seed using clay, but it wasn't successful. So they wanted to know, how successfully can chive seed germinate in clay soil?
Clay is a hard thing for germination because you really want good aeration for germination. You want that air to be passing through, that oxygen to be passing through. Clay is stifling. I'm not saying that it can't be done, but try and mix that clay with something else, especially you realize when it comes to germination, and that's why we use ProMix and so on for germination, because you want something light. You don't want anything stifling the germinating seed itself. You want the shoot to come out and have that flexibility to get to the top. Once you're germinating, you hardly go in soil, whether topsoil or clay. Clay makes it worse. You could germinate like string beans and so on, corn in regular soil, but I would stay far from clay soil for germination. Mix that soil with something else or germinate and then plant the seedling in the clay soil. You have a much better chance of success. But germination straight from clay soil, you're asking for problems even before you start.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mackey. So that would be the last question for tonight. So I just want to thank you so much for this in detail presentation, because we're moving more towards a more modernized type of technology in agriculture. And this presentation was very in detail. It gives us a better understanding and appreciation for the maintenance and the building itself. And I really like the examples that you bring across in terms of the mesh. So I just want to thank you for your presentation here tonight. So it was a very informative session. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Shakwana. And it
You're
was my pleasure. Thank you, guys. Thanks for the cakes and the claps and the hearts and everything. I really feel the warm, and I'm happy that I was able to impart some knowledge to you and to get you excited about protected agriculture and greenhouse farming. I think it's the way to go. I still do some outdoors, but when I'm in that greenhouse, I don't feel like I want to move. Just the greenery and the ambience and everything else. And to see people come to the shop and pick up the produce and just marvel at it gives me the impetus to keep growing every day. And I've thrown out certain challenges, certain little niche markets like the microgreens and so on. And I hope that someone, even one person, would take that up and run with it, because it could be a very lucrative business, especially if you're within the tourism sector. Thank you very much. And I wish you guys all the best on the rest of this Ag-cademy, and all the success to you guys, and kudos to Helen's daughters. Shakwana, it was a pleasure working with you, and have a good evening.
Good night. And you do enjoy your night. And it was a pleasure working with you as well.
Thank you.
Good night. Good night,
Good night.
everyone.